Why is politics essential in a disintegrated cult? Well, the 2-year-old goes through a number of experiences, often traumatic, and decides to dissociate from certain events which are locked in time and in a fight, flight, freeze pattern. The 3-year-old encounters something a little bit similar and decides to adopt a pleasing attitude, to basically see if they can be compliant and pleasing enough to the authority figure if they cannot survive and tone down the stress. The 5-year-old, the 6-year-old wants to go out into the world and start to explore and rebel a little bit more, and decides that in order not to negate the advantages of pleasing the authority figure, to become more surreptitious and learn to lie or manipulate. At a moment in 8 years old, 5 bullies gang up on a little boy, and he feels completely and utterly helpless, humiliated, and terrified. And in that moment, hate foments. Hate, being a natural byproduct of those ingredients, emerges as the dominant drive, as well as the desire never to be controlled and in someone's power, again with a deep distrust of people. At 10 years old, there's a beautiful art project, and there's an award that's won, and the teacher helps the 10 years old, and there's a tremendous sense of gratitude and enjoyment, and I've arrived and I belong. And that 10-year-old develops a trust in authority in that moment. And so it goes. Every year, a series of experiences take place in a series of different contexts. And in each of those experiences, the identity that is within those experiences, the habit, the pattern of thinking, speaking, feeling, and doing, that is an identity, responds, adapts, and takes shape, consistent with the underlying drive to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse, with the need to meet the human needs of survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, the developing of gifts, bringing those gifts powerfully into the world, and becoming part of something bigger than ourselves. And each of those selves, as they are partitioned, particularly in a fragmented world, in a disintegrated world, you don't see the entirety of any person at any given moment. There are different sides reserved for different contexts. And in a shadow-averse culture, you don't see the light and the dark shadow that has been banished as taboo or inappropriate or embarrassing, or that's too frightening, I want to forget it. You don't see those identities or factions within the psyche. By the time you get 30 years old, you have dozens of identities with dozens of unique strategies at moments in time. And when those moments in time are frozen in trauma and dissociated, or shamefully dissociated, or hypocritically dissociated, as in, I do not want to acknowledge that this is a part of me, then we have a dissociated self. And every part of the self that is unconscious or dissociated in any way continues its momentum unintegrated as an outlaw because it has been banished. As the cult demands that certain parts of each individual be suppressed and denied in order to exist within the cult, the individual must decide whether to splinter with those parts of themselves in order to believe that one belongs in the cult, or whether to hide them from the cult and be aware that if one was fully seen, one would be outcast by the cult to which one belongs. Now, every denied unconscious faction is in its way seeking to destroy the system that the conscious and owned and welcome part of the faction is trying to maintain. So if your nice, polite little boy is welcomed into the cult circle, into the cult box, and your intense anger and outrage is not welcome in the cult box, your nice little polite boy will seek to maintain the framework of the cult in which one belongs by adhering to it. While the enraged part that has been banished outside the framework, see, there's a framework. What goes on outside the framework cannot be seen. When it cannot be seen, it cannot be influenced. But it is a part of us, a denied and unconscious part of it. It's outside the purview, but it's a part of us. And those parts of us seek reunification, to be owned, to be loved and welcomed so that they can continue to play a constructive role. They are the same raw energy that has experienced often a taboo and unacceptable force meeting it, which has created a response that is also taboo and thus unacceptable within the cult framework. When little girls are incestuously raped, the helplessness, shame, terror, dissociation, rage, desire to put on weight is a natural part of a response, particularly in a sexually and traumatically and parentally illiterate culture, where we don't take care of our young and repair the damage that takes place. However, as she does those things, they may not be welcome or understood within the cult. She may be teased for putting on weight, which the part of her that grasps that one of the reasons she was molested was that she was attractive is only too happy to put up with. I want to be fat and unattractive because this cult has not taught my father to keep his dick in his pants. This cult has not taught my mother to protect me. This cult has not taught anyone to grasp what's going on around me. This cult does not give a census or teach children in school how they can safely leave abusive homes. This cult abandons children, and in the reactive and instinctive responses, the response to taboo behavior is often equally taboo. It's a one-sided game. The obesity falls within the purview of visible senses. The molestation is carefully hidden. This is a real crisis. And the more split and disintegrated we are, the more we are at war with ourselves. And part of this is a reflection of the more splintered and at war our cult and outer environment is. The more split and at war we are inside. When we have a lip service to generosity and taking care of the poor, Christianity, and we have a practice of punishing people by making them homeless if they do not have money, we have a split. When we talk about family and love, but do not teach the meaning of love, what does love actually mean? And how do you know when you're being loved versus being manipulated versus being abused, particularly with parents who cover abuse in the name of love and don't take the time to explain it? A fractured outer environment in which pockets of reality here have little or nothing to do with pockets of reality here, and each one requires a different survival and coping strategy, split the self in equally fragmented ways as different identities are developed to relate to different arenas in the world. Now, the culture as a whole, to one degree or another, is reflected in the individual. The culture as a whole is a reflection of all of the individuals. And so there's a mirroring process. One can learn a tremendous amount about one's family, about one's culture, by the symptoms of dis-ease, by the styling and the design that is adopted by the individual. Traumatized individuals do not come out of nowhere. They come out of traumatic environment. Shame-based suppression does not come out of nowhere. They come out of shaming and suppressing environments. And as we as individuals seek to move forward towards the underlying goals of fulfilling our human needs and feeling sustainably better, we will seek an objective, a path. We will seek a path, an objective that will allow us to achieve well-being. Now, with a severely split self, an example being, from age 5 to 10, the only way to keep safe was to hide. In other words, from age 5 to 10, the outer environment was so sociopathic that statistically speaking, being visible and vulnerable increased pain, because the larger authority figures in the environment wanted to inflict pain. So to be visible gave them a target. And so 0 to 10 is committed to invisibility. But let's say that from 20 to 30, you have a couple of authority figures and partners and friends in your relationship that actually care about you. And so this part of you is wanting to be more transparent. The only trouble is a lot of the 0 to 10 age is dissociated, meaning it was so traumatic it split off and went numb as the consciousness descended into the reptilian brain of fight, flight, and freeze and gave up on feelings. Now, without the skill to bring that part back on board, that part does not know the reality has changed. It's living in a dissociated nightmare. It's living in the memories in the body. In that context, it will have a panic as the older parts move towards transparency. And the older parts, having suppressed and made these younger parts unconscious in various ways, will not understand where that anxiety is coming from, because we're dealing with a split self. Now, when you're dealing with a split self that is at war with itself, with different strategies for pursuing well-being, the forward motion is the net gain in that war. So if 49% of the self wants to hide and 51% of the self wants to be visible, the visible part has a 2% majority. And so with that majority, we'll pull the other part, kicking and screaming. And it'll be tough work because we're dealing with an unintegrated, uneducated self. Now, this is where the role of politics comes in. Politics is the art of forming a fragmented or holistic alliance of power to make movement in one direction or another. The good politician goes over to the part that says, I want to be safe, and I want to be safe by hiding, and goes over to the part that says, I want to be safe, and I want to be safe by being transparent and seen, and says, well, you both want to be safe, and what if we make a deal? You get to keep these secrets, and you get to be transparent about these things. Tries to listen to both factions, either intuitively, if it's unconscious, it's got to be intuitively, or just compromises or experiments. The politician seeking leadership may also come from the outside, as in an effective leader or a huckster. Buy my 3-day course, and you are guaranteed to have wonderful things happen. Well, the scared part that wants to be invisible may go along with that. That's a new thing. The part that wants to be seen may go along with that. And a few weeks later, after the 3-week course has not changed your life, maybe there were some benefits, so there's an avenue to pursue more courses. There's also a compromise. We'll meet in the middle. We won't be too open, we won't be too close. There's also a volatility where the power swings back and forth from one faction to another. One faction says we're going to keep secrets, then that creates a problem in your romantic relationship when one of your secrets is discovered. Then the part that says, see, we shouldn't have kept secrets. No, that was a bad idea. Now we're going to do it my way, gets a shot at it. But then as the transparent part runs into some area where they get in trouble for being seen, they share the truth about something, and in a shame-based culture they're being gossiped about. The part that wants to be safe by keeping secrets has a fit and says, see, that's what happens. That's why I kept that secret. You see, and so while every part of the self is working towards the same underlying goal, meeting the human needs and feeling sustainably better and avoiding feeling chronically bad, they're doing it in different ways. Every suppressed, banished outlaw within the psychic system of cult is actively trying to destroy and undermine the cult that is banishing it. Makes perfect sense. If you belong to a group, or if your survival depends on a group to include you, and it shuts the door on you, and you're on the outside and your odds of survival go down, well, that house is your enemy. And so you're going to bash in the door here, and if that doesn't work, you're going to break a window, and you're going to destroy the structure that excludes your survival. And this is the flaw, this is the innate flaw in every system, because every cult in the history of cultures has banished some facet of the self. Even coming into language and into paradigm tends to lead to these polarities where this is good and this is bad. This is feeling sustainably better, that's feeling sustainably worse. I don't want to look at the truth in that area because it feels worse than avoiding it. So you have tensions between the parts of the self that look at the ultimate truths and the parts of the self that are focused on immediate gratification. I don't want to look and have that difficult conversation. I'd rather lose my marriage. That's in the future. I want to have that conversation, even though it feels horrible, because I don't want to lose my marriage. You see, there's two different factions within the psyche. One's prioritizing the immediate, the other is prioritizing long-term. One's prioritizing the self. Many are prioritizing the self. Fuck the marriage. You see, when you get married, you have two factions now in close proximity. And your partner does not want to get married 100%. More accurately, your partner has numerous rebellious factions that do not want the marriage. And she has numerous factions that do want the marriage. And if the marriage occurs, it is because a majority of those factions had the vote. But what about the 30% that is fuming? We can't go out drinking. We can't do this. My husband doesn't like this side of me, and you're shoving me into a bottle to please him. Fuck him. Get a divorce. How can we sabotage the marriage? And when a majority of the parts that don't want to be married take hold, it can be they seize power in a reactive coup. You know, you did this one thing that upset them, then you didn't repair that, so you lost votes. And you did another thing that upset them. You didn't repair that, you lost votes. You did another thing that upset them, and you lost your majority. Now the part that's been screaming the whole time, we never wanted a part of this marriage, I want out of here, comes into focus. It's like, okay, what do you want to do? Well, finally, I want to go out racing my car. I want to go drinking. I want to do this. I want to do all the things that I haven't been able to do in this fucked up marriage where I'm not welcome. Well, if that part can convince the majority that it is in fact a better life to be unmarried, then that's the end of the relationship. It's not just a temporary separation. That is the end. Now, if I want my partner to be married to me, I have to get to know all of the factions in her, including some of the factions that she's unconscious about, including some of the factions that she is too ashamed to talk about. And particularly if those are intense factions, meaning in an incredibly destructive cult, it can be half of the person is put underground. Half of that person is sublimated. The rebel in them is sublimated. The angry bitch is sublimated. The curiosity about lots of sex is sublimated. One thing after another. You're a bad girl if you do that. You're horrible, and we don't want you in this family if you do this. And what's left is this narrow, relatively weak concoction of culturally accepted things, surrounded by an angry morass that's trying to destroy the system and come back in. Well, if I want the marriage to survive, I may need to deal with those outlaws and see what they want, independent of what the normal cultured self wants. Because ultimately, conscious or unconscious, the relationship survives when a majority of the person A desires to be in a relationship with the majority of person B. And if that's all it is, like a 55% margin, it's a weak marriage. If my 5-year-old wants nothing to do with your 2-year-old, and your 2-year-old wants nothing to do with my 0 to 10-year-old, and a lot of stuff went on for you at 2 years old, so it has a lot of emotional charge, and that part isn't in the marriage, well, that's taking a lot of energy out of the marriage. If the 33-year-old in me is mentally satisfied but sexually frustrated, but the 45-year-old in me is feeling just fine with the sex and isn't all that focused on sex at this time, there's going to be some frustration and some peace with that. Now here's the thing. The more split and ununified the self, the harder it is to form any strong bond. Meaning, if you've got someone who's 90% integrated, a rare phenomena in our cult, who's 90% integrated and they want to go this way, and you're going this way, then you can ally with 90% of them in a very passionate and strong marriage. But if they kind of want to get married 2% over the 49% that doesn't want to be married, well then, as soon as you have some tussle about something, you know, I would rather go to the Caribbean for the holiday, I'd rather go on, to Thailand for the holiday. That now it's like, yeah, see, you go to Thailand, I'll go to the Caribbean because my vote is stronger. I have a stronger majority vote to go where I want to go for vacation than I do for this marriage. And so there's nothing to hold it together. Whereas if you've got 80, 90% saying, I like that part in him, I value that, I respect that. My 3-year-old loves cuddling with the 0 to 8-year-old in my partner. My 5-year-old feels safe with the 45-year-old in my partner. My 10-year-old is curious and feels adventuresome and like a little princess with my 13 to 40-year-old. But my little princess 10-year-old hates the 0 to 8-year-old who's pulling her hair and poking and trying to get attention, competing, and doesn't want, wants to be the most important little boy and doesn't want to share attention with you, your little girl, wants to be important over here. So there's a sibling rivalry in that dynamic, first reflected in the original family, now reflected in the ages within the marriage. These part are okay, these part are not on speaking terms. Perhaps the resentful, glowering 17-year-old is not into the marriage, but is in with the kids being happy. When you try and bring two families together, the kids play a really important role. If all 3 children from a former marriage hate the new partner with a passion because the new partner does not connect and satisfy the bonds in those age groups, well, it's unlikely the relationship can survive because the inner child, as well as the outer children, can create a huge mess if they're not on board. And the majority determines the amount of risk and leadership that can go on in a marriage. It's very much like a political party. If 95% of your base are on board with taking this particular action, you can borrow huge sums of money, you can bet the farm, you can work long hours, and you're not going to lose your base. But if you've only got a 55% kind of margin, and 10% of your vote isn't on with that idea, you can't lead them in. Because if you take that step, you step out of the sphere of your majority, and now a majority of you doesn't want to go along with it, or a majority of your partner, or a majority of your family, or a majority of the culture. Because politicians are just that, looking at the same fractal patterns as a nation. So there's a fractal pattern as a nation. There's a fractal pattern as a community. There's a fractal pattern as a family, and there's a fractal pattern in the fragmented identities of the individual psyche. And there's a move towards harmony and healing, and there's a move towards unification under duress. For example, you may spend, 80% of your life arguing with yourself. Do I want this or this? Do I want to eat this or do I want to eat that? Do I want to get a degree or do I want to get this? And there's just constant bickering and a stagnant life. But as soon as a guy with a pistol walks into your room and says, if you don't get out of the house in 5 minutes, I'm going to kill you. Well, just about every single faction in the self is on board. They may be at odds about what to eat, but they're all on board to staying alive. And this is how an exterior threat can unify a disgruntled and dissociative country. Someone declares war on the country, and suddenly all bickering and stuff is forgiven. Someone rapes little Jenny, and the brother who isn't speaking to the mom and the mother who's having an affair on the dad, they drop it all and go out to find their daughter. Once the daughter is found, the majority vote disintegrates, and you go back to bickering about the small things. And so there are certain actions in environment that pull the self together. And then there are other environments that kind of lead to fractious ripples, etc. And what we're really dealing with is a crisis of healing and a crisis of integration. Because every single one of those splits, every single one of those traumas, every single one of those absolute and divergent ideas relates to a split within the self. And those splits weaken the self. Just like a ball, if you fractured the ball in 1,000 different ways, it's at risk of falling apart, of completely disintegrating. A mind, when it completely disintegrates, goes insane. A heart, when it completely disintegrates, is broken and can no longer process and react to the stimuli of the day and lives in past trauma. A body that breaks, if the immune system breaks, it's overrun with disease. If the body completely breaks, you're dead. So to heal these fractures within the psyche is the ultimate journey. These breaks are tiring, painful, sad, lonely, confusing, crazy-making, isolating, and they set us up so that it is impossible to win. When half of the psyche desperately longs for intimacy, and half of the psyche is terrified of intimacy and pushes it away, no matter what a partner does, they will fail with half of us, and they will win with half of us. If they try to come close, then the other part will push them away. If they try to go away, then the other part will run after and cling. Because half of the self wants the opposite of the other half of the self. And there is no way to please a partner to satisfy them in any way. If your mind says, you're a bad guy and I don't want to have sex with you, and your body is highly aroused and feels the need for tender touch, then whether the person has sex with you or not, you're unsatisfied. Either you say, I've been tricked and duped and I shouldn't have done it, but it feels great, at least for now, or I feel lonely and disconnected and my mind says you did the right thing. It's a loss either way. So politicians can lie to unify the self and lie to unify the group. Certain secrets and things can be kept to maintain some fragment of forward motion. There can be compromises within the self. I'll let you watch porn for an hour if you work on your spiritual book that you're writing for 2 hours. So, the part that's fuck this and all this spiritual crap and it's all hypocrisy, you get to rebel and be an adolescent for an hour because you're represent one in, you've got a third of the vote. But in exchange, you let me get my spiritual book written in these 2 hours because I've got 2/3 of the vote. And so there's some sense of compromise in terms of, it can be all one, we do it your way this time, and the same is true with a marriage. You like staying home for holidays, and I like going out for holidays. So, half of the holidays we'll stay home, we'll take one turn staying home and then the other turn going out. And we both won't be fully happy half of the time, but there won't be an overall imbalance. And those overall imbalances are important because if there truly is an overall imbalance such that the partner can't stand to be in relationship relative to not having to compromise and be on their own, then that's the end of the relationship. Now, when you go back and forth from one side to the other, so you go deeply into love and closeness, and then you got to do something else to be distant and separate because you haven't integrated those two parts of self. So you can go in and be close in the morning and then be distant in the afternoon and go back and share those two positions. Or you could do it over a week period. We'll be a week close and then the next week I'll pull away from you. Or you could do it over a month. We'll be a month of closeness and a month of pulling away from you. The more you go to the one extreme without including the other part of the psyche, the more you will rapidly go over back to the other extreme. So when you've got a split and disintegrated self, you've got multiple ways to please the factions so that there's some sense of shared power and a reality that reflects all of their different needs. But you've either got, a much more day by day. You can also balance it out where, if only 2% is the majority, 49% doesn't want this and 51% does, so you got this little majority. You can just always go along at 2%, or you can, take turns and give this part what it wants for a good chunk of time, and then give this part what it wants for another. And for example, the process of going in and out of relationship. I love being alone, so I'll fall passionately in love with someone for 3 weeks, and then when this part is fed up with having to be suppressed in order to fit into the relationship, then I'll end the relationship and go be totally alone. And so I'll just kind of vacillate in and out to accommodate these different parts of self. Or the other way that these splits can express themselves is, let's say I'm part of the 51% faction that wants to be close to a partner. And I'm in denial about the part of me that wants to be distant. So 51% of me wants to be close, 49% of me wants to be distant. But I'm all grandiose in my spirituality, my New Age things. I would never want to be distant. No. I'm all about being close. And one way to bridge this dishonesty and still have a balance of closeness and distance is we simply pick someone who represents the 49%. So I'll be the dominant personality in the relationship, and I want to be close, so I say. And so the relationship will move slowly towards closeness, with me constantly saying how close I want to be. However, I've picked someone who wants to be distant, and so they'll always back away just a little bit, and I'll have to chase them, and I can then pretend that I want nothing more, that all of me, my entire totality, just wants to be close. I've just picked someone who runs away every single time I try to be close, and in doing so allows me to maintain my mystique, my image, that I'm the one who wants to be close. And similarly, if I have suppressed my anger and rage, but 30% of me is filled with anger and rage, it's just not the spiritual thing to do, I will find a partner who is 60% angry and enraged. In fact, I will enrage them. Maybe they're only 30%, and that's for them. But they also need to carry my rage, because I'm not dealing with it, and I don't have anger. I'm a spiritual Buddhist. I'm unattached. I'm very, very, very attached to being unattached. I want everyone to know exactly how unattached I am, and you didn't seem to notice how unattached I was. I'm attached to that. And so I've got to have my partner hold my faction of rage, since I'm not dealing with it. And so I will forget their birthday. That always enrages them. And then they can carry both of our rage, and I can be beautiful and superior in every way imaginable, and be the kindly Buddhist, etc., and pretend that that's all their stuff. I have no reason whatsoever to wish in anything. I just, my mind is getting old, so I just forget things for some reason. But, if you were positive, you'd understand, which is another enraging thing. And so now I've got the rage in the conversation. I'm just identifying with the part of my faction that's holier than thou. And the system that we live in, the system that we operate in, has a certain political conversation that is at a certain level of integration and a certain level of hypocrisy, a certain level of healing and a certain level of dis-ease, a certain level of wholeness, a certain level of split, some strength, some weakness. The larger fractal pattern is to serve as a reminder of what we need to work with as individuals, often in complete denial. No, I would never take bribes in Washington. I just take bribes from my own inner child who tells me I'm wonderful if I give them another ice cream cone when I need to get to work. So the larger fractal pattern is in many ways a mirror of then the community pattern, which is then a mirror of the individual pattern. And the individual pattern is a mirror of the community and the group. So if there's a scapegoat in the group, it's very likely the part of the group that no one is willing to deal with within, and someone's been caught carrying that role within a group. If you have a system in which parts of the self are bad, within a large group, someone has to be caught holding the parts that have been labeled bad. And in a system of shaming and suppression, that person will be scapegoated, put in prison, laughed out of town, money confiscated, no one does business with them because they're carrying the bag. What's the bag? The shadow. That which is denied, positive and negative. And there's a light shadow and a dark shadow. Oh, that's arrogant, that's superior, that's all wrong. No, it's called excellence and joy. And the person who's carried that is a little bit weird because we don't want to look unhumble. So, that excellence, that clarity is put in the bag. And so politics is the sacred art of forming a coalition to take steps forward where deals are brokered, bills are passed that give this corrupt lobbyist some of what they want and this part of your opposition party some of what they want, and also have some of the things that you want. That's what a bill is and looks like within a fractured self. Now, the deeper process of integrating and healing requires technology beyond the cult that fractures and bifurcates its people. The technology that integrates and heals is parental competence, traumatic literacy, psychological literacy, mythological literacy, relational literacy, emotional literacy, feminine domains, which in a split cult between the masculine and feminine, where the masculine traits are elevated and the feminine traits are deprecated, you have a unhealthy and unholy balance. It's not whole. Got the feminine side malnourished in men and women, and you've got the masculine side overfed and deified in both men and women. And as a result of that skewed value hierarchy, all of these feminine technologies are underdeveloped. And things like driving faster in a combustion engine is overdeveloped. There's too many cars. There's not enough sane, emotionally literate human beings. And as you get into imbalance, the beautiful grace of the circle becomes the watermelon lopsided, bumpy ride of an ignorant and uninformed cult. The restoration is to bring attention to the feminine, to heal the splits, that which is unconscious, unwelcome, denied, that which is kept secret, that which is taboo, to heal the splits and welcome more and more of the self to tell its story, to be understood, to be valued, to be a necessary component to the restoration of the whole, which it is, which it always was, and which in the healing and the integration process of grace, of excellence, of love, of sustainability, beauty, truth, and goodness, we'll be again. The banished parts will be reintegrated. The circle of moving away becomes the journey of moving towards. As we return to the whole beings we were when we began and know it through language for the first time.